the Indian Ocean on Australia's west coast. For many travellers, the entrance to Fremantle Harbour is their first look at Australia. If you want to travel overland to Sydney from here, it's a 2,500-mile journey. The journey begins and ends with a port that links Australia to the rest of the world. A few miles inland is a city, Perth, the capital of Western Australia. The mixture of new and older buildings and busy streets is typical of most cities, though in Perth, you're never far from a park. From Perth, the overland journey begins. There's now a train called the Indian Pacific, which takes you right to Sydney without changing trains. Before 1970, when the width of the track was different in every state, these passengers would have had to change several times. They're mostly overseas tourists or Australians on holiday. Each car has its own conductor to check you on board. The diesel engines can go at 80 miles an hour. This one and its crew will travel as far as Kalgoorlie. Altogether, 4 engines will be used. It's a 2.5-day journey to Sydney. The Indian Pacific has sleeping cars only. You can choose a 2-berth or a single compartment. This is a single one called a roomette. It's a night journey to Kalgoorlie, but in daylight you would see the sandy coastal plain leading to the ranges a few miles out. The soil's sandy because the plain was once under the sea. Up in the ranges, there's plenty of water. Kalgoorlie's supply is piped from near here. Further on is rich wheat country, but the land gets sandier once you're near Kalgoorlie. It's too dry for wheat here. The town exists because of its gold mines up on the ridge, and because water could be brought in. Gold has kept Kalgoorlie busy since it was discovered here in 1893. But the price paid for gold on the world market isn't rising, and mining costs are. Kalgoorlie's lucky that nickel's been discovered in the area, so its future doesn't only depend on the golden mile of mines. About 35 miles away, in country where gold's been mined for 100 years, the biggest find of nickel has been made, at Kambalda. Nickel is mined like coal. Usually the ore's pulled straight to the surface by cable, but this mine's built on a slope, so trucks can drive down to pick up the raw nickel and take it to the stockpile. Nickel is valuable because it's one of the minerals used to make stainless steel, which is tougher and lighter than ordinary steel. There's a big demand for stainless steel all over the world. Most of this nickel will be exported. Western Mining Corporation started Kambalda in 1966. Just about everything, except sunshine, had to be brought in. Now it's got $1 million hotel and suburban houses and gardens in the bush.
Oh, good on you. Not again. Good on you.
Like Kalgoorlie, there isn't much local water. It too is brought to Kambalda by pipeline. Old miners from the area might be amazed to see modern industrial buildings here, like these where the nickel ore is crushed and separated. But the way they're using Lake Lefroy would come as no surprise. It's a salt lake. These modern land yachts are just for pleasure, but similar ones used to transport miners to work at the old diggings. Now there are roads and heavy motor transport. This truck is taking crushed nickel to the railway at Kalgoorlie on the first stage of its journey overseas. At Kalgoorlie, or Parkston just outside, the width of the track used to change. Now the standard gauge, 4 feet 8.5 inches wide, goes right through. The Indian Pacific, with a new engine and crew, heads east from here towards the Nullarbor Plain. Gradually the trees thin out, though sheep find feed. It's like this till you reach the Nullarbor, a vast limestone plain where there are no trees at all. And though sheep live on it, you don't often see them from the train. Only an occasional siding breaks the line. Slower trains pull into the siding to let faster ones pass. Freight trains often use them. Now there's a standard gauge track. Freight can also go straight through to Sydney in 4 days. The trains carry anything from frozen meat to liquid cement. The long run is broken only by a series of stops at railway towns along the plain. This one's Cook in South Australia, right in the middle. Towns like Cook exist to keep the railway running. They depend on it for most of their supplies, and the trains depend on them for fuel and water. These are brought by train from the coast and stored ready for use. The men who do the refueling and their families have their homes here. Each time a freight train stops at a town like Cook, the load is checked to make sure it's fastened securely. Sometimes the movement of the train can loosen the supports. This is called a piggyback train. The post office is still open at Cook, but one of the other services has closed. These were once jails, where anyone arrested on an old steam train would be locked up. Nowadays, the local police station is at Tarcoola, further along the track, and you'd be taken there. You can't go to jail at Cook, but you can go to hospital. 2 nursing sisters live here permanently. The flying doctor can be called if he's needed. People buy their groceries and small goods at the railway's store. Other things can be ordered by phone and brought in on the train in a few days. The families rent their bungalows from the railways or the PMG department, and they've all got a view. Being a housewife isn't very different if you live in the middle of a plain or in a city.
Hi, Gran. I finally got your washing out at last.
Mrs. Sims and her neighbour are used to the life, though they do miss some things.
We find out here you don't have much nightlife as you do in the city, but the open air environment for the children, they seem to like it. They don't go without very much out here. "950 miles from Perth, 1,500 from Sydney. On board the Indian Pacific, it's the second night of the trip. People have had a chance to get to know each other. The club bar is a popular meeting place. The staff still have work to do, preparing the compartments for the night. Both the 2-berth, or twinettes, like this, and the single-berth roomettes. And before most people are up next morning, as the train turns towards Port Pirie, the guard's already at work. It's his job to keep a record of the journey. If he wants to check up or down the train, he doesn't need to get up. By the second morning, we're off the Nullarbor. For the first time in hundreds of miles, there are trees again. Then, before long, we pass the Flinders Range. The train runs down between the mountains and the coast towards Port Pirie, where lunch will be served. Once, everyone would be getting ready to change trains again, instead of preparing to eat. Freight for Melbourne and Adelaide is transferred at Port Pirie, but if you're a passenger on the Indian Pacific, it's lunchtime. 144 people are fed in 3 sittings. The waiters serve meals 9 times a day. From Port Pirie, the train heads up towards New South Wales. It's still about a day's travelling to Sydney. 3 more meals. Food's included in the price of your ticket, so most people eat every course. Not far from Port Pirie, there's a stretch of clay and sandy loam where wheat grows again.
It's wintertime. The young wheat's just showing through. The further inland you travel, the drier and sandier the country gets. Up around Broken Hill, we're back into scrub, rather like the country at Kalgoorlie. You don't see water near the track till Lake Menindee, an artificial lake formed by damming the Darling River 90 miles from Broken Hill. Some Broken Hill people like to cool off by the lake at weekends in these holiday cottages. They call it the Sunset Strip. It's the third evening of the journey. Through the night, the train heads on across New South Wales towards the east coast. By morning, we're less than 300 miles from Sydney, and the country has changed again. Parkes is almost in the centre of New South Wales, in rich farming country, where several roads and railways cross. Like most country towns, it's the business centre for the local district. The streets aren't crowded every day, as in a city. Many people work in the surrounding country and would only come into town perhaps once a week. You know you're in farming country by the amount of farm machinery on sale in the town. 5 miles out, at one of the state's largest silos, some of it's in use. Wheat from western New South Wales is stored here till trucks or trains take it wherever it's needed. There's a good, even rainfall throughout the year in the district, and it doesn't get either too hot or too cold. So the country's good for most kinds of farming. At this farm, they breed a variety of stock. It gives the farmer more chance to make his money. If one lot doesn't do well, there's always others to keep him going. This kind of farm is called a mixed farm. The emu is kept as a pet. Farmers in the district keep more cattle now than they used to. At present, on a small property, you can make a bigger profit from them than from sheep or wheat. It's good cattle country too, as Bill Freebairn explains.
Quite a few are turning to cattle and veal raising. Cattle can be pretty variable. You can have cattle in the centre of Australia and you can have them in the Mount Kosciuszko, but mainly you've got to have good pastures wherever you are, or in the arid zones a good amount of country for them to graze on.
CSIRO has its radio telescope in a valley near Parkes. It's a kind of radio aerial that picks up radio waves from outer space. The control cabin picks up the waves, which bounce off the reflector or dish. By fixing where these radio waves come from, we learn more about the universe around us. After Parkes, you begin to feel the journey's almost over. The country soon starts to get hilly. We're getting near the Blue Mountains, part of the Great Dividing Range, which runs down the east coast of Australia. An electric engine is used for the last stage, over the Blue Mountains and down into Sydney. Holiday resorts like Wentworth Falls have always been popular. Many people now make their home in the mountains and travel down to Sydney to work each day. On the other side of the Blue Mountains, there's another coastal plain like the one behind Perth. Several rivers cross it on their way to the sea. This one's called the Nepean. Over the river, and the train is on the outskirts of Sydney. Soon after, it's running through a completely man-made landscape. Two and a half days and 2,500 miles later, the Indian Pacific is at Sydney Central Station. The journey ends as it began, with a port, a city, and another ocean, the Pacific.